Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're talking about who pays what when buying a house. I'm Jeb Smith, Coldwell Banker Residential Brokerage here in Southern California, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Before we get into the video, do me a favor. If you like this video at the end, hit the like button, subscribe if you're interested in more videos in buying and selling. My goal here is to help educate buyers and sellers and help guide you through that real estate process. So thanks again for taking the time to watch. So the question was, who pays what when buying a house? And so before we get into the actual question, I want to address a question that I get asked quite often, and that's, can you finance the cost of closing cost when buying a house into the purchase on that property? And the answer is no. When buying a property, you have to come up with whatever your down payment is, and you have to come up with the closing costs. That can't be financed into the actual purchase on that property. So that is money that you will need in addition to whatever your down payment is in order to close on that property. So who pays what? Well, in buying a property, there's kind of two sets of closing costs, if you will, or two sets of fees. Some of those fees are associated with the loan, and some of those fees are actually associated with the purchase of the property. I'm not really going to get into the details of the fees associated with the loan because that varies depending on, the mortgage professional, the mortgage broker, the mortgage banker that you decide to go with. But some of those fees on that side include origination points, processing fees, underwriting fees, all of that stuff, right? So it's really hard to touch on that because each lender is a little bit different in what they charge. But with regards to buying a house, the fees are pretty typical and customary in what a buyer and a seller pays in the process. Now, keep in mind too that all of this, when putting in an offer, is a negotiation. When you write your residential purchase agreement up to buy a property, you're asking or telling in that contract that you're writing who is going to pay for what fees in the transaction. And so today, when I talk about this, I'm going to talk about how I would write a real estate purchase agreement for you if you were the buyer, or me if I were buying a home. This is how I would write it up, and typically speaking, this is, generally the seller would accept it this way. These are, kind of customarily how we write contracts. And so with that being said, there are some upfront fees that are required when buying a house and going through that process. And really the only upfront fee you're going to pay on the purchase side or on the buying side is inspections. Any inspections you do on the property are generally required to be paid up front. And what I mean by inspections are home inspections. You might do a roof inspection or a sewer inspection or multiple inspections, and those fees are paid directly to those inspectors at that time. Now, other things that happen in the real estate purchase process, if you will, is you might have to pay an appraisal fee up front. Again, that's a loan fee that's associated with the lending side, but that is one of the upfront fees that you'll have to pay before you actually close on the property. All the additional fees that we're going to talk about now are actually paid through the closing. So when you close on that property at the end, you have to bring in your down payment, you have to bring in these additional fees in addition to whatever your closing costs are on your loan in order to actually close on the property. So typically when I write a purchase agreement for a buyer, what we're doing is we're asking the seller, okay, so we're going to say who's paying what now. The seller is going to pay the natural hazard disclosure statement. And that is a different that's a document or a disclosure that tells you where where hazards are, natural hazards, if you will, like fault lines, flood zones, that sort of thing in relation to your property. So typically that's paid by the seller. Typically we ask that the seller pay for a termite report. Now, we're in a market right now where some sellers counter that out and say the buyer needs to pay for the termite report and what have you. But typically, we ask the seller to pay for a termite inspection. We might also ask for the seller to pay the Section 1 termite that needs to be completed. So any woodwork on the property that needs to be completed that's damaged by termites, the property being tinted, that is something we would typically ask the seller to pay. Now that's something that, again, it's part of the negotiation, and they may say, we're not willing to do it, or, ask for it on the request for repairs or what have you, but typically we're asking for that to be paid by the seller. Now, as we move through the contract, the escrow fee. Now, this is really only real fee that the buyer is going to pay on the purchase side. Now, the escrow fee is typically paid, the seller pays their portion, the buyer pays their portion. So each has a portion of it. They both kind of split it, if you will. They each pay their own side. And then we ask for the seller to pay title insurance. So the title insurance is going to provide a clean title on the property. We're asking the seller to pay that. Now, as a buyer, you will have a title insurance policy that you have to pay if you're getting a loan through the lender. Again, that's a fee that's discuss with your actual mortgage professional and doing that side. But as far as the purchase goes, the seller is going to pay the title insurance. We're also asking for the seller to pay any transfer taxes, with the county, with the city. We're asking the seller to pay those. We're asking the seller for any HOA docs that need to be provided as part of the purchase. We're asking that the seller pay those fees as well. Anything related to the HOA, we're essentially asking that that the seller pay upfront, right? Now, as a buyer going in, you're going to have to pay your HOA dues if there's any due at that time. And then we're asking typically for the seller to pay for a home warranty on the property, for a year. That's a whole different video talking about home warranties, which I can link to below, but we're asking the seller to pay the home warranty. And then outside of that, everything else is kind of paid for by the seller. Now, as a buyer, there will be some property taxes that are probably due when you buy the property, that you have to pay current. There are HOA fees a lot of times that you have to pay current, as when you're buying the property. So there are some fees there on the purchase side, but most of this pertains to the loan side and buying a property. So in a purchase of a property, the majority of the fees on the real estate side are actually seller costs, not really buyer costs so much. The buyer costs are more on the loan that they're getting and the closing costs that are involved on that side. So I hope that is helpful, answers your questions. I might have left something out here just talking to a camera. So if you have additional questions about who pays what in the process, do me a favor, comment below or contact me directly. I'm happy to address those questions. And as always, I appreciate you taking the time to watch, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.